They told me the wedding would be small, just close family, they said, careful not to meet my eyes. But when I saw the dust on my son's shoes that morning, and the trembling way he said nothing's wrong, Mom, I understood something had already happened in that barn long before the vows were ever planned. And whatever they buried out there, it had my name stitched through it like a warning. For 15 years, I raised my son on a quiet stretch of farmland that held more silence than comfort. After his father died, the barn became both our storage room and our shelter, a place we rarely entered, a place tied to too many memories. Now, as my son prepares to marry a woman I barely know, I find myself pushed aside with gentle excuses and half smiles. The land feels different, as though the dirt itself is hiding something. And the more I try to ignore it, the more it pulls me back toward the one place I swore I'd never step into again. The morning the message came, the house was still half asleep. The kettle hadn't even warmed, and the sun was sitting low behind the barn, barely touching the frost on the grass. My phone buzzed once, a small, polite sound, like it didn't want to bother me. I remember standing there in my robe, my hands still damp from washing a single cup left in the sink. The message sat on the screen like a stranger at my front door. Short. Formal. Careful. And before I even opened it, I felt a cold space open inside my chest, as if the day already knew what it was bringing. I'd always imagined my son's wedding would arrive with laughter in the house, with voices echoing down the hallway, with someone shouting from the front porch asking where we kept the extra chairs. But that morning, all I had was a message. No knock. No hug. No familiar footsteps on the wooden floorboards that creak like old memories. I read it slowly, as if the words might change if I blinked long enough. Small ceremony, it said. Just close family. Details attached. I stared at that last part, details, because weddings aren't made of details. They're made of people. And somehow, even in those 3 short lines, I could feel myself slipping out of the picture frame. My son had always been gentle with me. Quiet, like his father, but softer around the edges. He used to check in every morning before school, leaning against the kitchen counter, asking if I needed anything from town. Lately, though, he'd been passing through rooms like someone in a hurry to avoid their own shadow. His fiancée's family had taken the lead on the planning, that was clear enough. Their names filled the message: who was hosting, who was organizing, who would be helping. My name wasn't anywhere. And the house, listening as it always does, held its breath with me. Later that afternoon, he stopped by. Not for long, just enough to say he had a minute. He stood near the doorway, like he didn't plan to sit. The winter air followed him in, settling on his shoulders. I got your message, I said. He nodded, eyes drifting to the floor, then to the window, then somewhere past both. It'll be simple, he said. We're keeping it small. His voice didn't carry any real excitement, just a practiced calm. The kind people use when they're delivering news they already know will bruise. I tried to smile, but it felt thin. I see they've got everything handled. He swallowed, running his thumb along the seam of his coat like he was smoothing down a lie. They're organized, he told me. They just like to help. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the exhaustion in the way he held his shoulders. Not the tiredness of planning a wedding. The tiredness of balancing something heavy, something he didn't want me to touch. I asked him what any mother would. What do you want, son? For the first time that day, he lifted his head. And for a second, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who'd cling to my sleeve when he was scared of thunderstorms. He almost said something. I felt it. But whatever words he had broke apart before they reached his mouth. It wasn't until I brought up the venue that he changed. I asked lightly, or as lightly as a mother can, where are you having it? He hesitated. Not the kind of pause people make when they're trying to remember. The kind where they're choosing between truth and something easier. He rubbed his hand over his jaw, letting out a quiet breath. The barn, he finally said. The barn. Our barn. The one he used to avoid like it held something hungry inside. I watched him carefully. "You never liked that place," I said. He didn't answer. Instead, he shifted his weight, a small, uneasy motion that told me everything he wasn't saying. His fiancée's parents had offered it, he said. They thought it was rustic. Pretty for photos. But none of those words sounded like his. And none of them explained why his eyes tightened when he said them. For a moment, the room felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in. The barn held years of silence, secrets, and dust. It was the last place we had spoken to his father. The last place my son had cried openly as a child. Why, out of every option, would they choose that place? And why did he look like he wished I hadn't asked? After he left, the house settled back into its quiet shape. I stood at the window, watching him walk toward his truck without once looking back. The sky was dimming, turning the barn into a dark silhouette against the cold horizon. The message still sat on my phone. The details still waited, tidy and complete. And the barn, that old, heavy place, seemed to be watching me through the dusk. I pressed my palm to the glass, feeling the chill creep into my skin. Something wasn't right. Not with the wedding. Not with my son. And as the last bit of light faded, I found myself whispering the question I didn't dare ask him. Why the barn, and why now? The house didn't answer. But the silence almost did. The morning light was thin, barely awake, when I heard his truck roll up the gravel drive. The frost on the ground hadn't melted yet, it made the world look powdered, untouched. He stepped out slowly, like a man trying not to disturb the day. But it wasn't his face that stopped me. It was his shoes. A dull, reddish dust clung to the edges, packed into the grooves like it had been pressed there with intention. Barn dirt, the kind we hadn't walked through in years. Something inside me paused, the way a room goes still when someone enters with a secret. I met him on the porch, my sweater pulled tight around me as if the cold had crept under my skin overnight. He smiled, or he tried to, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was a tremble beneath the surface, the kind that only a mother would notice. He set a box of small decorations by the door, saying they needed a place to store things before the wedding. His voice floated around me, soft and organized, but thin enough to see through. Like tracing paper held against the light. Behind him, his fiancée lingered near the truck, arms wrapped around herself even though the sun was climbing. She watched him more than she watched me. As if she expected him to slip. Or speak. Or break. I kept glancing at his shoes. That dirt. That impossible, unmistakable dirt. We never walked behind the barn. Not since he was a boy. Not since the night he came running into the house with tears he couldn't explain. Whatever lived in that soil, whatever memory or truth, he had stayed away from it. Until now. I forced myself to breathe normally, to act like I didn't see it. But the dirt watched me, quiet and accusing. Inside the house, he knelt to open the box, sorting little folded napkins and ribbons his future in-laws insisted were essential. His hands moved too fast, too eager to look busy. I stood at the counter, pretending to tidy up, watching him from behind the corner of my eye. Long morning? I asked, my voice soft enough to be harmless. He froze for half a second, just long enough to answer a question I hadn't asked yet. Then he looked up, forcing a breathy chuckle. Just helping out. They wanted to clear space in the barn. For decorations. He said barn without meeting my eyes. That was the first fracture. When he finally did look up, his gaze skittered away again, landing on the window, the table, anywhere but me. His fingers drummed against the box, jittery and restless. Outside, his fiancée stood closer to the porch now. Her eyes kept flicking toward the house, toward him. She whispered something under her breath, but her voice didn't carry inside. He nodded once, barely, and her shoulders loosened. Like they were in the middle of a quiet conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Or a plan they hoped I wouldn't ask about. I noticed the way she looked at his shoes, then up at him. A silent exchange. A question. A warning. Something. I walked over to him, kneeling slightly to pick up a fallen ribbon. The closer I got, the more I smelled the earth, dry, metallic, the kind that only turns that reddish color after a long winter. You were behind the barn? The words slipped out gently, almost like a whisper. He stiffened. A second fracture. He shook his head too quickly. No, just near it. They had some boxes stored there. His voice thinned at the end, almost breaking apart. People crack like that only when the truth is pushing from the inside. Like a hand against glass. I didn't press. I didn't even look at him long enough to make him feel cornered. I just nodded and brushed the dirt gently off his shoe with the side of my finger. He pulled his foot back as if the contact burned. His fiancée's breath caught outside. I could hear it through the half-open door. They were hiding something. Not loudly. Not recklessly. But carefully. Delicately. Like it was fragile. Like it was dangerous. Like it had a shape they weren't ready to name. And when I stepped back, giving him space, both of them seemed to exhale at the same moment. Relief. A relief far too big for such a small question. Later, after they drove away, I walked out to the porch and stared at the fading tire tracks. His footprints were still there, marked faintly in the frost, each one edged with red. The same red that slept beneath the barn like a secret no one meant to disturb. The wind moved through the fields, brushing the tall winter grass, but the barn stood still. Silent. Watching. I pulled my sweater closer and looked toward that shadowed corner behind it, the place he'd sworn off years ago. The place he had returned to. Whatever he touched out there. Whatever he saw. It had followed him home. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't afraid of what I might ask. But of what I might remember. She arrived in the late afternoon, when the sun was lowering itself behind the barn and turning the fields a washed-out gold. Her small car looked out of place in the gravel drive, too clean, too careful, like it didn't want to touch the dirt. I watched her step out, smoothing the front of her coat even though it didn't have a wrinkle on it. She smiled when she saw me, but it hovered above her face like a veil someone forgot to fasten. There was something in the way she held her hands. Lightly. As if they were trembling and she didn't want me to notice. But I did. She asked if she could come inside, and her voice wavered on the last word, like she wasn't sure she should. I told her, of course, this house had always been open to my son's friends, and now, to the woman he'd chosen. Still, I felt the air shift when she crossed the threshold, as if she brought something with her the house didn't quite recognize. She glanced at the framed photos, the worn rugs, the creaking floors. Her eyes lingered longer than they needed to, studying everything the way a person studies a map before walking into unfamiliar woods. We sat at the kitchen table, the one that still held faint scratches from my son's homework years. I poured tea, and she wrapped both hands around the cup, absorbing its warmth like a person coming in from winter. She made small talk at first. Dress fittings. Guest lists. Flower choices her mother kept changing. But there was a tension in her shoulders that didn't match her words, a thin, bright thread pulled tight. Every few seconds, her gaze drifted toward the window, toward the barn, as if something unseen was calling her attention back. When she finally spoke of it, she did so with the softness of someone afraid to hear the answer. "Who built the barn?" she asked, her voice almost too light, as though she wanted to pretend the question was casual. I looked up from my cup. "My husband's father," I told her. "Long before I came here." She nodded, but the answer didn't settle her. Her fingers tightened around the warm mug, and a small crease formed between her brows. "And what was it used for?" I thought back, the old hay bales, the broken tools, the spring storms we hid from. "Mostly storage," I said. "Some seasons, animals. Nothing strange." Her lips pressed together. She was thinking too hard for a simple curiosity. Then came her third question, the one that broke the surface of her intentions. Was anything ever stored there for a long time? She didn't look at me as she said it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window, on the barn sitting still in the late light. My pulse slowed. Not sped, slowed. The way it does when your body recognizes something familiar but unwelcome. I told her no. Nothing had been kept there beyond ordinary life. She inhaled, shallow and sharp, as if that wasn't the answer she'd wanted, or feared. Every answer I gave seemed to tighten a knot inside her rather than loosen it. When she finally looked at me, her smile had disappeared. Not faded, vanished. Like a mask that had slipped without her noticing. She leaned forward a little. Her voice lowered. Do you ever go behind the barn? I felt the kitchen go still. Even the clock seemed to pause between ticks. No, I said quietly. Not anymore. I didn't add why. I didn't have to. Some things linger in the echo of silence. She nodded as if she knew. As if someone had already told her something. Something she wasn't supposed to repeat. She asked another question, softer than the rest. Has your son ever mentioned anything unusual out there? I studied her face, the fear hiding just beneath the practiced politeness. The way her throat tightened when she swallowed. The faint tremor in her hands trying so hard to be still. I told her he hadn't. Not recently. Not to me. Her breath released in a shaky sigh, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. Not out of sadness, out of pressure. Like she'd been holding a secret for days, waiting for someone to confirm it without asking directly. Then she stood abruptly, smoothing her coat again, though now her hands were unsteady. Before she left, she paused in the doorway. She didn't turn around. Please, don't wander the property alone these days. These days. Her voice caught on those two words, almost breaking. I didn't ask what she meant. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I watched her walk to her car, her steps quick, her shoulders drawn inward as though the wind itself might overhear her thoughts. The engine sputtered once before starting, and she drove away without looking back at the house, the fields, or the barn. The sun had nearly dipped below the horizon now, casting long shadows that stretched across the yard like reaching arms. One of them fell across the barn door, darkening it completely. I stayed in the doorway long after her car disappeared, listening to the cold settle into the wood of the porch. Her warning repeated itself in my mind, quieter each time, sinking deeper. These days. Something had changed out there. And whatever it was. She was afraid I might go looking. The sun was slipping behind the treeline when I stepped outside, turning the yard the color of cooling embers. The air felt heavier than it should have. Still. As if the ground itself was holding its breath. I wasn't planning to walk toward the barn, my feet just drifted there, the way a memory pulls you without asking. The grass brushed against my ankles. A bird called once, then went quiet, like it had seen something before I had. And that's when I noticed it. The door. Closed. Latched from the outside. A door that hadn't been shut in years suddenly looked like it wanted to stay that way. Growing up, that barn had been our childhood chapel. Dusty beams. Quiet corners. Sunlight breaking through the wooden thin, forgiving lines. It held our summers, our secrets, our fights, and every version of who we used to be. Nobody ever locked it. Not once. Even after we grew older, after life softened some things and hardened others, the barn stayed open. It was part of the land, the way water is part of a river, something that just is. But that evening, the air around it felt different. Colder near the door. Still enough to hear my own breath catch when I reached for the latch. I paused before touching it. Something about the metal looked too clean. Like fingers had gripped it recently. Like someone had made a decision standing right where I was. 2 sets of boot prints pressed into the dirt. Fresh. Close together, as if the people wearing them had been talking or arguing before walking away. I glanced toward the house. One window glowed faintly. A silhouette moved inside. Whoever had locked that door didn't want it open. Not today. Maybe not ever again. I crouched near the prints. They were deep, deeper than the ones left by people just passing through. Whoever made them had been standing still for a long moment. One pair was bigger. Wider heel. The other smaller, but sharp at the toe, like someone who walked with purpose even when they were scared. I brushed my thumb across the edge of one. The dirt crumbled softly, still loose, still warm with the day's heat. Behind me, a branch cracked. Too light to be a person. Too sharp to be the wind. I stood and placed my palm flat against the barn door. The wood felt warm, but something beneath it didn't. A faint tremor, maybe. Or maybe it was just my heartbeat echoing back through my hand. I leaned in, listening. Sometimes old buildings speak, they creak, they settle, they sigh. But this one sounded like it was holding something in its chest. A quiet shifting, deep and muffled, like something, or someone, was moving farther away from where I stood. I stepped back. My throat tightened the way it does when you sense someone watching you, even if you can't see them. Then I noticed the smallest detail, a sliver of wood freshly chipped near the bottom corner, like the door had been shut too quickly, or too forcefully. The more I stared at that latch, the more wrong it felt. It wasn't the metal. It wasn't the prints. It was the way the barn itself seemed to shrink under the weight of being closed. For years, it breathed. Tonight, it hid. I took another step back, letting the air settle between me, and that old wooden body that suddenly didn't feel empty at all. A memory surfaced. My brother earlier that morning, the dirt on his shoes, the way he brushed it off like it wasn't worth mentioning. His fiancée whispering too quietly. Both of them glancing toward the barn as if waiting for something to finish happening. And now this. A locked door. Fresh prints. A quiet shifting behind old boards. Why now? I whispered to myself. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the open field. The barn didn't answer. But the truth tugged at the edge of my mind, not loud, not clear, just enough to leave a chill on my skin. Someone had gone inside. Someone had closed it. And whatever they left, or whatever they wanted to stay hidden, was still there. When I turned toward the house, I caught sight of movement again. The same silhouette. Standing still this time. Watching. Only when I blinked did it move away, the curtain falling back into place like nothing happened. I stood there a while longer, listening to the quiet settle around the barn. The wind picked up just enough to move the grass, but not enough to move me. The latch glinted once in the fading light. Cold. Certain. I knew I could open it. Just lift the metal. Pull the door. Step inside. But something in the silence told me not to. Not tonight. As I turned to leave, the boards behind me groaned, slow, like something shifting its weight in the dark. I kept walking. Didn't look back. But halfway to the house, I realized something that made my hands go cold. The door had been latched from the outside. Which meant whoever, or whatever, was inside. Never locked it themselves. And that thought followed me all the way to the porch. The night settled slow that evening, the kind that makes shadows gather in corners they don't usually visit. I stood near the barn, my hand hovering inches above the latch I still hadn't touched. The dirt around my feet looked soft, untouched, but somehow older, like it remembered more than I did. A cold breeze slipped past me, carrying the faint smell of dust, wood, and something else I hadn't breathed in years. A sound followed it. Not loud. Not clear. Just a whisper of something shifting inside the walls. And with it came the memory I'd spent years trying not to hear. There are certain places your mind returns to only when you're tired enough to stop fighting. For me, it was that barn. Even after all these years, even after grief softened into something almost manageable, the thought of it could still pull me under like deep water. My husband spent more time in that barn than he ever did with us. Late nights. Long silences. Dust clinging to his clothes like a second skin. He said he was working, though he never showed me what the work was. He said the noise I heard was tools falling, though nothing ever seemed out of place when I walked in the next morning. His secrets lived between those wooden beams long before his temper did. The night he died, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the kitchen breathe. People said it was sudden. Unexpected. A heart can only take so much, that's what they told me. I believed them for a long time. Until the night my son refused to go inside the barn again. He was only 8. Small, soft-voiced, gentle with everything except the truth. He came running to me with wide eyes, breath shaking like thin glass. "Something fell," he whispered. And then he cried into my shirt, like the sound had clawed straight through him. We never talked about it again. I let the silence bury it. Or maybe I thought it would bury itself. But standing there now, with the barn locked and the night pressing close, that memory didn't feel buried at all. It felt awake. I took a slow breath, hoping it would steady me. It didn't. The boards on the barn looked darker than before, almost bruised by time. Dust clung to the corners, but the ground near the door was freshly disturbed. Boot prints. A drag mark. Something faint, like someone had shifted their weight while deciding what to do. My hand drifted toward the wood again. Not touching. Just close enough to feel the cold moving through it. And then the memory unfolded itself further, the one I had pushed so far down it felt like another life. The night my son heard something fall, we weren't alone in the house. My husband was supposed to be working late. I remember the way the wind rattled the windows. The way the animals grew restless. The way the barn door slammed shut on its own, or maybe not on its own. I remember my son standing at the top of the stairs, saying, "Mom, something's wrong out there." He wasn't a child who scared easily. He had my father's steady bones. But that night, he trembled. Like he'd seen a shadow move where no shadow should have been. I should have gone out there. I should have checked. But I didn't. Fear can silence a person faster than truth ever could. Now, years later, with my fingers brushing the air near that same door, the silence felt heavier, as if the barn was holding its breath again, waiting for something I still hadn't learned. The wind shifted. Just enough to move the dust along the base of the barn. Just enough to stir something inside my chest. I stepped back. Not because I wanted to, because my body knew something my mind refused to see. The sound came again. Soft. Like wood settling. Like weight shifting. Like the past rearranging itself behind old walls. My stomach tightened. Could the past really claw its way back? Or had it never left, just waited for the right moment to be heard again? Why now, with my brother acting strange, his fiancée whispering, the dirt on his shoes, the locked door? Why now, when everything seemed to be moving towards something I didn't understand? A part of me wanted to believe it was just nerves. A tired mind making shadows where there were none. But another part, the part that remembered my husband's anger, remembered the nights he came home with dust in his hair and lies on his tongue, that part felt the truth in my bones. Secrets don't stay buried. They settle. They wait. And when the ground shifts, even a little, they rise with it. I looked at the latch. Still closed. Still cold. Whatever was in that barn. Whatever had been left there. It wasn't done with us. And I felt that same small scratch beneath my ribs, the one I felt on the night my son shook in my arms. I stepped away slowly, like backing up from a sleeping animal you're not sure is actually asleep. The barn loomed behind me, darker than the night, its silence stretching out like a long, tired breath. Halfway to the house, I turned once, not all the way, just enough to catch the outline of the door. Still locked. Still holding something in. Or keeping something out. The past has a way of choosing its moment. And standing there, with the cold creeping up my arms, I realized something I'd never let myself consider before. Maybe the past wasn't returning. Maybe it never left. Maybe it's been waiting in the dust all along. For someone brave, or foolish, enough to open the door. The moon was thin that night, a soft slice of white hanging over the fields like it didn't want to be seen. Sleep wouldn't come. It hovered at the edge of my mind, then drifted away, leaving the house too quiet, too awake. So I walked. Bare feet. Cool earth. The kind of silence that wraps around your shoulders and follows you out the door. When I reached the yard, the barn looked different. Not darker, just more aware of me standing there. Then I heard it. A scrape. Metal against soil. Slow. Rhythmic. The sound of someone digging in a place that had no business being disturbed at midnight. I froze under the moonlight, letting my breath steady itself against the night air. It was the same barn I'd grown up beside, the same one that had held my husband's secrets, my son's fears, my own unanswered questions. But something about it felt new tonight. Not in the way a place changes with age, but in the way a room changes when someone else is inside it. A soft wind picked up, carrying the smell of damp dirt. Heavy. Fresh. Turned over recently. The boards along the side of the barn were old, but the gaps between them had widened with time. Moonlight slipped through in thin silver lines, like someone had drawn quiet, trembling veins across the wood. I stepped closer. The earth beneath my feet grew softer. Like it had been walked over. Pressed down. Moved. I remembered the way my son used to cling to me when night fell, how he'd stare at the barn as though waiting for something to step out of it. He never said what frightened him. Fear takes language away from children. And sometimes, adults too. I pressed my palm against the barn wall. The wood felt cold. Colder than the air around it. Then the sound came again. A long, slow drag. Metal scraping through soil. Deliberate. Measured. Not rushed. Someone was working. Someone who didn't care about being overheard, or someone who thought they wouldn't be. My breath held itself. I leaned closer, listening with the same careful stillness my mother used when the radio crackled during storms. I moved along the side of the barn, toward the narrow crack where the moonlight leaked through the boards. The shadows inside shifted. Not the flutter of birds. Not the scamper of small animals. Slow. Heavy. Human. Two shapes. Bending. Lifting. Digging. The metal struck something hard, a dull thump that vibrated up the wood and into my fingertips. My heart slipped into a slower rhythm, the kind that comes when your mind tries to make sense of something it already fears. I stood very still. Listening. Watching the shadows move in long, quiet strokes. One of them straightened. Paused. Wiped their forehead, or maybe looked toward the door. I couldn't tell. The other kept digging. Shovel. Lift. Turn. The soft collapse of dirt being moved to the side. Every sound felt thick, magnified by the emptiness of midnight. What were they searching for? Or what were they trying to hide? The thought settled into me with a weight I didn't want to name. A whisper of movement brushed past the back of my mind, a memory of my husband walking in with soil stuck to his boots, claiming he'd dropped something heavy out there. A lie he didn't even try to soften. I pressed my ear slightly closer to the boards. The digging stopped. Just froze. The silence that followed wasn't normal. It felt like someone inside the barn was listening back. For a moment, the night held its breath with me. Even the wind stopped moving. I stepped back, slowly, careful not to let the gravel crunch under my feet. The stillness inside the barn thickened. Like a pause too heavy to ignore. Then I heard it, the soft shift of weight. Fabric brushing against wood. A boot adjusting in dirt. Someone was close to the wall. Closer than before. My pulse rattled quietly beneath my skin. I moved another step back. The moonlight caught the edge of a footprint near the barn, a fresh one, the tread deep and sharp. Not mine. Not old. 2 sets. Left in a hurry. Returning? Hiding? A soft murmur floated through the wall. Not clear enough to understand. Just enough to know it was a whisper meant for someone else. Then another voice, lower, strained. Urgent. And then nothing. Just quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes when someone decides it's safer not to make a sound. I felt the hair on my arms rise. There are moments in life when something inside you recognizes danger before your mind catches up. A childhood instinct. A mother's intuition. A memory buried too deep to shove away. I felt all of them at once. Whatever they were doing in there. It wasn't work for a wedding. It wasn't decoration. It was something that didn't want the light. I stepped back until the barn was a shadow instead of a presence. The moonlight stretched long across the yard, thin as a blade. Inside the barn, the digging did not return. No footsteps. No whispers. Just the heavy, breathless quiet of people waiting in the dark. Watching. Listening. Deciding. I turned slowly toward the house, forcing my feet to move, one careful step at a time. But halfway there, I stopped. Because the truth pressed itself against my ribs with a cold, familiar certainty. They weren't burying something. Not at midnight. Not with whispers. Not behind locked doors. They were unearthing something. And whatever it was, it had been waiting in that soil for a long, long time. The morning light came in thin, like it didn't want to touch anything it didn't have to. I sat at the kitchen table, listening to the slow tick of the clock, each second stretched long, like it was waiting for someone to speak first. No one did. There was a bowl of fruit in front of me, oranges, too bright against the gray morning, and for reasons I couldn't explain, they felt out of place. Like joy sitting in the wrong house. Footsteps whispered down the hallway. 2 sets. Soft. Careful. And before they even entered the room, I knew something was coming. Something small. Something that would change everything. They stood in the doorway the way people do when they're afraid to be seen, my son slightly behind her, the bride's hands knotted together as if trying to hide their shaking. "Mom," he said, but the word felt borrowed. Not his voice. Not his warmth. She stepped in first, smoothing the front of her dress, even though it didn't need smoothing. We've been thinking," she said softly, "about the ceremony." The ceremony. The one I'd stayed up half the night picturing, white chairs on the lawn, her veil catching the evening light, his nervous smile. The one we were supposed to prepare for together. "What about it?" I asked, though I could already hear the answer forming in the quiet. "It's going to be smaller than planned," she said. My son stared at the floorboards. The same boards he used to race toy cars across. Now he couldn't look at me. "Just for the couple," she added, almost whispering. "And then, even softer, we think it's better that way." The clock ticked behind me. A long, slow exhale from the house. My name, the one always written at the center of every family gathering, was missing again. This time completely. I watched their faces, the way fear softened their edges, the way guilt tried to hide in the corners of their eyes. It wasn't anger they were afraid of. No. It felt like they were protecting me. But from what? She moved to the counter, picking up a stack of napkins, soft, cream-colored cloth with lace edges. They were meant for the reception. For guests. For celebration. Now she folded them one by one, slowly, deliberately. The kind of folding people do when they need their hands to keep from telling the truth. They won't be needed, she murmured, placing each precise square on top of the next. My son shifted his weight. Cleared his throat. Still didn't look at me. I noticed how his shoulders curved inwards, like he was bracing for a blow I had no intention of giving. The boy who once ran to me with scraped knees was now shrinking away from my gaze. I stood slowly, the chair legs brushing the floor with a soft sigh. And their bodies stiffened, just a flicker, but enough. Enough to tell me they were scared of something far bigger than a ruined wedding. Tell me what's going on, I said. He swallowed. Hard. Mom, it's just easier this way. For who? Neither answered. Outside the window, the barn stood in the distance, dark, quiet, almost watching. The same barn I heard digging in last night. The same barn whose silence now pressed against the morning like a secret trying to breathe. The bride folded another napkin. Her fingertips trembled. Their fear. It wasn't about the wedding. It was about me. Or something they believed I'd see. I stepped a little closer, just enough to see my son lift his eyes for the first time that morning. There was something there, something soft, something torn. Why don't you want me there? I asked. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but the words caught. He glanced at the bride, a silent plea, or maybe a warning. She gave a tiny shake of her head. I felt the shift then. Small, but sharp. Like a thread snapping inside a quiet room. He tried again. I think it's best if things stay calm. Calm. A strange word to use on a day meant for celebration. Her hands froze over the last napkin. Pressed down too hard. Creased the fabric. Something flickered in her expression, fear mixed with something else. Pity, maybe. Or sorrow. You're not ready, she whispered. For what? Silence pulled in the room. I felt it then, that same heaviness from the barn last night. The way the darkness had pressed close. The way the shovel had gone quiet the moment I approached. A secret doesn't hide itself. Someone hides it. And whatever they were hiding. It lived between us now, breathing quietly, waiting to be found. The bride lifted her eyes, tears barely held in place. You weren't supposed to hear anything, she said. My heartbeat paused. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Hear what? Her gaze drifted toward the window. Toward the barn. The rest of the day moved slowly, like the air had thickened around us. They stayed close, too close, watching me as if measuring every step I took. Every shadow. Every glance at the barn. I didn't ask anything else. Sometimes silence brings out more truth than questions ever will. By evening, the sunlight stretched long across the fields, touching the barn with a faint, uneasy glow. I stood at the window, tracing its outline with my eyes. A wedding without me. A ceremony I wasn't meant to witness. And a barn full of secrets that had started whispering in the night. Whatever they were hiding. They believed I wasn't ready to know. But the night has a way of opening doors that daylight keeps shut. And I could feel one beginning to open. The barn looked different in the morning light. Less like a building, more like a confession. A thin layer of fog clung to the ground, curling around my shoes as I walked. The grass was wet enough to darken the hems of my pants, each step leaving a darker print behind me, like the earth wanted to hold on. I stopped at the door. The lock hung crooked, snapped clean through, its metal edges shining in the pale sun. For a long moment, I didn't touch it. I just listened. To the silence inside. To the memory of last night's shovel. And then I stepped in. The air inside was colder than I expected, thick, damp, settled. Like everything in that space had been holding its breath. Light sneaked through the cracks in the boards, thin blades of gold cutting across the dust. They made the place look split open, like it had something to show whether it wanted to or not. I walked slowly, tracing the path I imagined someone took just hours earlier. The ground was uneven. Soft in places it shouldn't be. And then I saw it. A mound of soil, darker, loose, recently disturbed. The kind of mound that doesn't belong in the middle of a barn floor. I stood there, staring at it, feeling an ache rise in my chest. Not fear. Not quite. Recognition. That strange sense that something you don't understand is still somehow connected to you. I knelt down, pressing my fingertips lightly into the dirt. Cold. Wet. Metallic. The smell reminded me of rain-soaked iron, and something older. Something buried deep. My husband's work boots used to carry this smell after long days in the field. He'd leave a trail from the barn to the kitchen door, shaking off the soil with a tired laugh. Funny how a scent can bring back a whole person. Even one who's been gone a long time. I brushed away a thin layer of dirt. Something caught beneath my nail. It was leather. Just the corner of it at first, rough, cracked, the edge peeling the way old jackets do when they've seen too many seasons. I pulled a little more soil away, slow, almost scared of what would come with it. A familiar brown emerged, darker than it used to be, but unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat, held there like it didn't know whether to leave or stay. My husband's jacket. The one with the torn seam at the elbow. The one he wore the autumn before he stopped coming home at dusk. Before he became a memory people spoke about gently. I sat back on my heels, staring at the fragment as if it might pull itself free and explain everything. But it stayed still. Heavy. Quiet. I looked around the barn, the walls, the rafters, the dust floating in the beams of sunlight. There were marks in the soil. Shovel marks. Fresh. Clean-edged. Someone had dug recently. Someone had known exactly where to dig. A chill moved up my spine, not because of ghosts or spirits, but because the truth has weight, and I could feel its outline forming. My hands hovered over the leather piece, afraid to touch it again. It wasn't just fabric. It was history. And history doesn't rise on its own. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence. That maybe it wasn't his jacket. That maybe it was just something old the previous owners had left behind. But the mind knows what the heart refuses to accept. And I knew the feel of that leather. The way it creased when he bent his arm. The faint smell of motor oil that never washed out. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. Someone had dug it up. And someone had buried it again. But why? A warning? A message? Or a reminder? My hand trembled slightly as I pressed deeper into the dirt, feeling the fabric tug tight, anchored by something below. Something larger. Something still hidden. I didn't pull harder. Some truths require witnesses. And I was alone. Footprints circled the mound, faint, uneven, dragged. As if whoever was here left in a hurry. As if they didn't want to be caught. The barn door creaked behind me, a long, low groan. I turned sharply, heart beating faster, but no one stood there. Just the wind slipping through the broken lock. Just the dust shifting in the light. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. Watching. Waiting for me to find exactly what they left behind. The jacket fragment curled slightly at the edge, almost like a finger pointing deeper into the soil. Inviting me. Daring me. I stayed there a long while, kneeling, breathing, listening. The barn had its own heartbeat now. Slow. Heavy. Unsettling. And in that quiet, I understood something. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a relic of the past working its way to the surface. This was deliberate. Whoever dug here last night knew what they were uncovering. And whoever buried it again wanted me to see just enough. Just a corner of the truth. Just a reminder of the man I lost. I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my hands, though its weight stayed on my skin. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of soil and warning. And as I looked back at the barn, I felt the certainty settle deep inside. Whatever they were hiding. This was only the beginning. And the ground was ready to tell the rest. The kitchen was quiet. Too quiet. The sunlight fell in thin, trembling lines across the table, making the wood grain sharp and bright, as if it were trying to show me something I wasn't ready to see. He sat across from me. My son. His hands folded too tightly in front of him, the way children used to when they had a secret they couldn't speak. And I waited. Not knowing what I was waiting for. Not knowing that today, finally, the truth would come uncoiled, fragile, raw, and heavier than I could have imagined. He didn't look at me at first. Kept his eyes fixed on the floorboards, tracing cracks and scratches that had been there long before any of this began. I have to tell you something, he said, voice low, almost swallowed by the air in the room. I leaned back slightly, letting him find the courage. The way parents learn patience without realizing it. The way we wait, hoping they will choose to trust us with what we've always feared to ask. The morning sun warmed my shoulders through the window, but the chill in my chest didn't leave. It was the weight of all the nights I spent wondering, imagining, guessing, the nights I listened for shovels scraping dirt or the barn floor creaking like it remembered too much. He swallowed hard. Then finally looked at me. And for the first time, the boy who had once run to me with scraped knees was someone I barely recognized. His eyes were full. Of guilt. Of fear. Of something fragile that he couldn't put into words. Mom, he whispered, we found something. I waited, letting the words settle. Letting the silence press against us like the barn had pressed against the night. Under the floor, he said. Beneath the boards. Something my dad left there. Something he didn't want anyone to see. I felt the air shift in the room. The way it does when the truth leans in close, letting you know it's here whether you want it or not. He rubbed his palms together, nails biting into his skin. Please. I didn't tell you because I wanted to protect you. His voice cracked, shaking along the edges, carrying the weight of years of fear and careful silence. I thought you already knew. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. I never did. Not fully. He looked up then, finally meeting my gaze. And I saw it, the memory of that night, the night he refused to enter the barn after hearing something fall. The way his small body had trembled. The way my husband had left us with questions that never got answers. We didn't want to hurt you. I thought if I never spoke, maybe the past could stay buried. But pastes never stay buried. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the knot of fear and anticipation in my chest. What did you find? I asked softly, almost afraid to hear the answer. He swallowed again. Long. Slow. It's hard to explain, he murmured. The night Dad died, there was something he was hiding. Something in the barn. Something we never understood until we moved the boards. I pressed my hands into my lap, feeling the old anxiety curl through me like smoke. "It's a box," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. A small box. Rusted. Heavy. Full of things, letters, papers, something tied to him. I could feel the pulse in my temples. Could feel the barn, the dirt, the shovels scraping through my memory. "I wanted to keep it from you," he continued. "I thought if you saw it, it would reopen everything you survived." His hands trembled. The same hands I once held when he was a boy, small and shivering from nightmares. "I thought I could bear it alone," he admitted. "And maybe I could. But I was wrong. I shouldn't have assumed you knew. I shouldn't have assumed anything." I leaned forward. The table between us didn't feel like a barrier, it felt like a hinge, ready to swing open. "You never had to assume," I said quietly. "But now I need to know. Please, tell me everything." He nodded slowly. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't just my son. He was a messenger. A keeper of pieces of the past my heart didn't yet understand. The kitchen felt smaller now. Sunlight softened the edges of the room, but I felt the barn's shadow stretching inside anyway. He spoke in halting sentences, each word careful, fragile, like he was handing me pieces of glass and hoping I wouldn't break. "I didn't know how else to keep you safe," he said. I reached out, letting my fingers brush his hand. A silent promise passed between us, we would face it together. The past isn't kind. It waits. It waits in barns. In soil. In boxes hidden beneath floorboards. And tonight we would finally begin to uncover it. Because some truths, no matter how carefully buried, will always find their way to the surface. And now, I was ready. The moon had begun to wane, pale and fragile above the barn. Its light fell in fractured patterns through the gaps in the boards, painting the floor in silver lines. I stood there, knees pressed into damp earth, fingers clutching the loose soil around the mound. Beside me, my son hesitated, hands hovering over the ground as if touching it would awaken something he wasn't ready to see. The air smelled of wet dirt and old wood. Quiet, heavy, expectant. And beneath it all, a pulse, the barn itself seemed to hold its breath. We were about to dig into the past. To uncover what had been buried so carefully. And perhaps understand why some truths had never been spoken. I knelt there for a long moment, letting my fingers press into the earth, feeling its weight. Cold, damp, yielding. Every grain seemed to carry memory of labor, of secrets, of nights spent alone with fear. The barn smelled old, familiar, and yet strange, as if it had been waiting for this moment for years. I could almost hear the boards whisper, groaning under decades of silence. My son began to dig, careful, methodical, each scoop of dirt revealing hints of what lay beneath. I followed, hands joining his, working slowly. Neither of us spoke much. Words seemed unnecessary. The earth itself was telling the story. I thought about my husband. The way he used to disappear into this barn at odd hours. The way he kept secrets behind locked doors and whispered to shadows. I had always wondered, what was so important that he never shared it? Now, with every handful of soil we moved, the answer seemed to inch closer. The past pressed against my fingertips. Heavy. Insistent. And yet, there was fear too, not of what we would find, but of how it would reshape the memory of the man I thought I knew. The shovel struck something solid. Metal. My heart thudded. We scraped the earth away, revealing a small lockbox, its surface rusted, wrapped in canvas that had long since rotted. I reached out and touched it. Cold. Unforgiving. And yet, almost alive. We lifted it carefully, brushing away the dirt like handling a relic. It was heavier than I expected, as if it carried not only objects but the weight of decades, the burden of choices never shared. I unfolded the canvas slowly. Inside, letters tied with a faded ribbon, photographs curled at the edges, and papers written in my husband's hand, uneven, hurried, tremulous. I picked up a letter. The words were sharp, honest, raw. He had been planning to leave. To disappear. To erase the life he had built with us, leaving only shadows and questions. Something went wrong. Something I had never known. He had hidden his intentions here, in the barn, wrapped in canvas and earth, as if the soil could hold his guilt and fear. I glanced at my son. His eyes mirrored mine, wide, startled, unsettled. Neither of us spoke. The air was thick with the unspoken. Why bury it instead of telling us? I unfolded more letters, each one revealing fragments of his mind. Regrets. Confessions. Hints of despair I had never imagined. He wrote about the night he intended to leave, the plan that fell apart, the fear that someone might stop him. The barn became his refuge and his tomb, a hiding place for his intentions, for the parts of him he could not face aloud. A photograph slipped from the pile, catching the moonlight. It was him, young, smiling, standing beside the barn, a man who looked like he had everything yet carried everything inside him. I traced the image with my fingers, feeling the distance between then and now, the silence that had stretched across years. My son's hand brushed mine. "We didn't know what to do," he murmured. "We thought, maybe he left for a reason. We thought keeping it buried would protect you." I closed my eyes, letting the shock and grief settle like dust in the corners of the barn. He had tried to leave. He had buried his truth instead of facing us. And now, decades later, we were unearthing it together. The barn wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was the place where secrets waited for courage to find them. I opened another letter. A final confession. A map of fear, love, and desperation, penned in trembling ink. The weight of it was almost unbearable. But I had to read. I had to know. We sat there, the lockbox between us, the earth half dug around our knees. The barn groaned, settling with us, as if acknowledging the moment. I held the letters close, inhaling the faint scent of old paper, leather, and soil. Each word felt like a heartbeat from the past, a pulse I had never heard, until now. I looked at my son. His eyes were tired, wide, aware. We both understood, silently, that this discovery didn't undo the past. It only made it clearer. The barn was no longer just a place of fear or mystery. It was a witness. A grave of intentions. And as the last light fell through the cracks, I knew the journey wasn't over. The truth was out, but its echoes would follow us, soft, insistent, impossible to ignore. Some secrets demand to be faced. And tonight, we finally did. The morning was gentle, pale light spilling over the barn like a whispered promise. I stood on the porch, fingers resting against the railing, feeling the air hum with quiet anticipation. The wind stirred the edges of the barn doors, but they remained closed, silent, waiting. A few birds moved in soft arcs across the sky, their shadows brushing the fields like slow exhalations. And then he appeared, my son, tall and unsteady, eyes searching mine as if seeking permission, reassurance, forgiveness. "Mom," he said softly, "stand beside me. Please." I nodded, heart tightening and releasing all at once. Today, the barn would not be a place of fear. It would be a place where truth, finally unearthed, met something stronger, a beginning. The day smelled of dew and old wood, a mixture of past and present. The barn loomed behind us, silent, its boards no longer threatening but steady, patient, like a witness. Inside, chairs were arranged in a small circle, white cloth soft against worn wood. A few close faces, quiet, familiar. The ceremony was stripped of grandeur, stripped of pretension, stripped of everything that had once held shadows. My son shifted beside me, his hand brushing mine, tentative. I could feel the tremor in his shoulders, the weight of years of hesitation and secrets we had carried together. His bride approached, holding her hands folded over mine. Her smile was soft, uncertain, yet honest now, not the careful mask from before. We didn't speak. Words seemed unnecessary. We had already said everything in shovels of soil, in rusted lockboxes, in letters that smelled of earth and ink. And now, here, in the light, we would witness a love unburdened. The morning sun caught the folds of her dress, the gentle rise of my son's shoulders. I breathed in the air, heavy with warmth, hope, and the quiet sense of something finally set right. The ceremony began without fanfare. No music blared. No voices called. Only the wind through the gaps in the barn, the soft brush of fabric, the measured rhythm of breathing. My son took his bride's hands in his. They looked at each other with a softness that had been missing before, a truth unearthed and held carefully between them. When my turn came, he reached for my hand. "I wanted you here," he whispered, voice breaking slightly. "The place my father never gave you, you deserve it." I felt the weight of that, years of absence, of quiet hurt, of waiting for permission that had never come. I squeezed his hand, letting the warmth travel up my arm, through my chest. The barn behind us remained silent, no shadows moving, no creaks of doubt. Tears gathered in the bride's eyes. Her hands tightened over mine. Her guarded smile softened, letting something real shine through. And I realized, we were all holding the same fragile thing, the understanding that truth, once faced, could finally allow something beautiful to grow. I could hear the faint scrape of shoes against wood, a reminder of what had been, and yet, how far we had come. Vows were spoken quietly, without ceremony or spectacle. Each word was deliberate, chosen, stripped of pretense. The past lingered at the edges, yes, but it no longer dictated the light. I watched my son speak, his voice steady despite the tremor I knew still lived in his chest. I watched his bride smile through tears, honest and unguarded. When they exchanged rings, I felt something shift beneath my feet. Not the barn, not the earth, but the history between us, the burdens we had carried, the secrets unearthed. It all seemed lighter now, settled into a quiet peace. I thought of the lockbox, the letters, the confessions. I thought of my husband, of what he had hidden and why. I thought of the shovels, the soil, the nights spent fearing the past might reach out from its grave. And yet here we were. Alive. Holding hands. Facing forward. The barn no longer a tomb of secrets, but a witness to something softer, something stronger. For the first time in years, I realized the past could be acknowledged without controlling the present. Love could exist alongside truth. And maybe, finally, it could thrive. The ceremony ended quietly. We stood together, hands linked, faces warm with sun and tears and relief. The barn behind us remained still, shadows softened, doors closed but welcoming, no longer a place of fear. A faint breeze stirred the edges of the cloth, as if the world itself exhaled. The bride rested her head briefly against my shoulder. Tears streaked her cheeks, and her smile no longer needed guarding. My son stood tall beside me, his hand lingering in mine, steady, present. I looked at the sky, pale and unbroken, and wondered if secrets could rot in the dark, yes, but if love could grow, nurtured by courage and truth, in the light we chose to face together. And for the first time, I believed it could. The barn, the past, the earth beneath our feet, all witnesses to a beginning, rather than an end. We walked forward. Finally, together.